The city wore winter like an heirloom necklace, each snowflake a pearl against the throat of Manhattan's financial district. From the 73rd floor of Ashford Tower, Victoria Ashford watched the world below transform into something almost magical. Though she had stopped believing in magic 10 years ago, the glass beneath her palm held the cold of December, a cold that matched the temperature she maintained in every boardroom, every negotiation, every carefully constructed wall around what remained of her heart. Behind her, the Christmas gala hummed with the particular frequency of wealth meeting wealth. Crystal chandeliers fractured light across marble, imported from quarries in Tuscany. Ice sculptures melted slowly on tables laden with caviar that cost more than most families earned in a month. The guests moved in predictable patterns, their conversations a symphony of transactions disguised as pleasantries. Victoria had learned to read these patterns the way sailors read stars, navigating by what people wanted rather than who they were. She turned from the window, emerald dress catching light with each movement. The gown had cost $8,000, though she could no longer remember why that number had seemed significant. Everything around her carried a price tag she had stopped noticing, the way people stopped noticing their own breathing. The pearls at her throat had belonged to her mother, one of the few things William Ashford had not sold or stored away after his wife died. They felt heavy tonight, like a promise she could not quite remember making. The memory arrived unbidden, the way trauma always does. She was 23 again, standing in the same room with a different dress and a heart that had not yet learned to protect itself. Ryan Mitchell had smiled at her across a similar crowd, and she had believed that smile meant something beyond calculation. He had been beautiful in the way of men who know their effect on women. Dark hair and darker eyes that promised depths he did not actually possess. For 6 months, Victoria had let herself believe in the possibility of being seen rather than assessed. The betrayal had been surgical. Ryan had used her trust to access proprietary information about a merger Ashford Industries had spent 2 years arranging. He sold that information to their primary competitor for $300,000, a sum that seemed almost insulting in its modesty. The merger collapsed. $50 million evaporated. Her father had handled the cleanup with the efficiency of someone excising cancer, never once acknowledging the wound beneath the business failure. William Ashford had looked at his daughter across his desk, voice carrying no warmth. Now you understand, men see dollar signs when they look at you, not a person. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. Victoria had nodded, feeling something inside her calcify. She built her walls with the same attention to detail her father used in constructing corporate defenses. No cracks, no weaknesses, no way in. A burst of laughter pulled her back to the present. Near the bar, a group of guests had formed a tight circle around something Victoria could not yet see. The laughter carried edges, the kind that cut. She recognized that particular sound, had heard it her entire life in rooms like this. The wealthy laughing at something, or more precisely, at someone. Victoria moved closer, her heels silent against marble. The crowd parted slightly, recognizing their hostess even before conscious awareness registered her presence. She saw him then, the target of their amusement. Daniel Cross stood with a tray of champagne flutes, his bow tie slightly askew in a tuxedo that had seen better seasons. At 36, he carried his broad shoulders the way men did when they had spent years doing actual physical work, not the pretend labor of executive gym sessions. His face held a particular kind of exhaustion Victoria had learned to recognize, the weariness of someone juggling too many responsibilities with too few resources. But his eyes remained warm, brown and clear, meeting the mockery with a dignity that made something in Victoria's chest tighten unexpectedly. That's the problem with hiring help off the street. A woman in diamonds that could have funded a small school dripped condescension with each word. No breeding, no training, no class. The man beside her, face flushed with expensive whiskey, added, "Must be nice getting paid to serve people who actually matter." Daniel's jaw tightened, knuckles white against the silver tray, but he said nothing. Victoria watched him make the calculation every service worker learned early. The math of keeping a job versus keeping dignity. His silence was not weakness, but survival, and she recognized it because she had once calculated similar equations in different contexts. A small figure appeared at Daniel's elbow, barely reaching his ribs. The girl could not have been older than 8, with brown eyes that mirrored her father's and an expression that suggested she absorbed far more than adults assumed. She carried a wrapped sandwich with the careful attention of someone protecting treasure. "You haven't eaten anything all night." The child's whisper carried worry beyond her years. "I saved you half of mine." "Thank you, sweetheart." Daniel's voice dropped to match hers, and Victoria saw his entire face transform with a love so naked it felt invasive to witness. "I'll eat it on my break." The girl's eyes swept the room with unusual focus, cataloging details most adults would miss. She noticed the security cameras in corners, the electronic locks on restricted doors, the patterns in which guests moved. Her backpack sat beside her abandoned chair, and Victoria could see the corner of a notebook protruding from the unzipped pocket. Something about the intensity of that small face reminded Victoria of herself at that age, before loss had taught her to stop asking questions. The group at the bar had moved on from mockery to crude speculation about what desperation drove a man to serve drinks at parties. Victoria felt anger kindle in her chest, unexpected in its heat. She had built her empire on emotional detachment, on making decisions based on logic rather than feeling. But watching this man absorb cruelty while his daughter tried to take care of him breached something in her carefully maintained defenses. She crossed the space in 5 precise steps, heels clicking with the authority of someone who owned every inch of marble beneath them. "Gentlemen," her voice cut through their laughter like a blade through silk, "I find your conversation tedious and your manners appalling." The silence expanded outward in concentric circles. Marcus Trenton, her CFO, turned from where he had been observing the exchange with barely concealed amusement. At 42, Marcus carried ambition the way other men carried briefcases, always visible, always ready. His smile never quite reached his eyes, a tell Victoria had noticed years ago, but chosen to overlook because he delivered results. The group at the bar rearranged their faces into expressions of contrition that fooled no one. Victoria kept her attention on Daniel, really seeing him for the first time. Competence showed in the way he held himself despite the humiliation, the precise economy of his movements as he set down the tray. Exhaustion shadowed his eyes, but had not dimmed whatever core of decency kept him standing there, taking care of his daughter when easier paths surely existed. The words escaped before Victoria's rational mind could stop them, fueled by anger at the cruelty she had witnessed and a reckless desire to puncture the smugness of men who thought wealth made them superior. "Open the safe in my office and I'll marry you." The ballroom erupted. Laughter rolled across marble and glass, genuine this time because everyone knew the Ashford Tower executive safe was legendary. Military-grade encryption, biometric locks, a system that had cost $2 million to install and remained impregnable to everyone except Victoria herself. The challenge was absurd, impossible, which made it the perfect joke. Daniel's face flushed, caught between gratitude for her intervention and shame at being made into a spectacle. He nodded once, a small gesture acknowledging something Victoria could not quite name, and returned to his work with the careful dignity of someone who had learned not to let humiliation break him. But his daughter did not laugh. The girl watched Victoria with an intensity that felt uncomfortably like assessment. For several heartbeats, their eyes held, CEO and child, and Victoria had the unsettling impression of being measured against some standard she did not understand. Then the girl slipped from her chair and disappeared into the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned young how not to be noticed. The party continued its expensive motion. Deals were made in corners where people thought sound did not carry. Alliances formed and fractured with the casualness of social Darwinism. Victoria moved through it all with the practiced ease of someone playing a role she had perfected, smiling and nodding and saying exactly what each moment required. 20 minutes passed before Daniel found her near the windows. His voice carried carefully controlled panic. "Have you seen Emma, my daughter?" Victoria felt her stomach drop. "How long has she been gone? 10 minutes, maybe longer?" Daniel's control was fracturing. "She knows better than to wander off, she knows." Within moments, security personnel fanned out across the building, checking bathrooms and service corridors and supply closets. Victoria stood with Daniel near the elevators, watching fear transform his face into something raw. She wanted to offer reassurance but had learned long ago that empty comfort insulted intelligence more than silence did. 73 floors above them, Emma Cross stood in Victoria Ashford's private office, heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too small for her chest. The office smelled of leather and some expensive perfume Emma could not identify, everything in it speaking of a world so far removed from her own that it might as well exist on a different planet. She had not planned this, not exactly. Emma operated on curiosity the way other people operated on oxygen, always needing to know how things worked, why systems functioned the way they did, what happened when you pushed boundaries just a little bit further. The challenge Victoria had thrown out had lodged in Emma's mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. The safe dominated the wall behind Victoria's desk, sleek black metal with a touchscreen that glowed faintly in the office's ambient light. Emma had watched her father work with security systems back when he still did that kind of job, back before Mom died and everything changed. She knew the basics of encryption, biometrics, the way sophisticated locks required multiple forms of authentication. During the party, Emma had observed Victoria with the focused attention she usually reserved for particularly interesting coding problems. She had seen Victoria pull out her phone and input a sequence that dimmed the lights in a specific pattern. The numbers had been visible for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for Emma to memorize them. 150-12003. She had watched Victoria set down a crystal glass, leaving perfect fingerprints on its surface. She had listened to security personnel discussing the impregnable safe in the executive office, their voices carrying the particular pride of people who believed in the systems they maintained. Getting to the 73rd floor had required patience and timing. Emma had waited until she saw a cleaning crew heading for the service elevator, then slipped in behind them with the confidence of someone who believed she had every right to be there. Adults rarely questioned children who looked like they knew where they were going. Now, standing before the safe, Emma felt the first whisper of doubt. This was trespassing. This was wrong. Dad would be furious, terrified, disappointed in ways that would hurt worse than anger. But the puzzle pulled at her with gravitational force. Could she actually do it? Could an 8-year-old girl solve something supposedly impossible? Emma approached the safe's touchscreen, fingers hovering over the glowing surface. The interface displayed a simple prompt. Enter primary code. The numbers Victoria had input on her phone, 150-12003. Emma typed them carefully, expecting nothing, expecting error messages. The screen changed. Primary code accepted. Biometric authentication required. Emma's breath caught. The numbers had been the safe's primary code, not just a phone function. But why those specific digits? People chose passwords that meant something to them. Dates they would not forget. January 15th, 2003. The date format clicked into place. The fingerprint scanner glowed, waiting. Emma remembered the glass Victoria had set down, the perfect thumbprint visible against crystal. But the glass had been cleared away, and even if Emma could retrieve it, she had no way to transfer a fingerprint onto the scanner. The polymer sheet in her backpack was for a science project about fingerprint patterns, not for actual security bypass. Emma was smart, but not that smart, 8 years old and suddenly aware of how the adult world operated on levels she could not yet reach. She touched the scanner anyway, more from frustration than hope. Red light pulsed. Authentication failed. Emma tried again, pressing her small thumb against the sensor as if determination could somehow transmute her fingerprint into Victoria's. Again the red light, again the rejection. On her third attempt, something changed. A different error message appeared. Multiple authentication failures. Silent alarm triggered. Security notified. The blood drained from Emma's face so fast she felt dizzy. Silent alarm meant security was coming and would not announce their arrival. The office door, which she had entered through when it was briefly unlocked for cleaning, had automatically sealed behind her. The electronic lock engaged with a soft click that now sounded thunderous in her ears. Emma was trapped in the CEO's office, having just triggered a security breach, with no explanation that would not make everything worse. Panic climbed her throat. She thought of her father's face, the fear he would feel, the trouble she had caused because she could not leave a puzzle alone. Tears burned her eyes. She was just a kid who had made a stupid mistake. Red lights began pulsing in the corners of the office, silent but insistent. Emma pressed herself against the desk, small and scared and realizing far too late that curiosity without wisdom was just recklessness wearing a clever face. Victoria felt her phone vibrate with the particular pattern that meant security alert. She pulled it from her clutch, saw the message that turned her blood to ice water. Alert, unauthorized access attempt, executive office, floor 73, silent alarm triggered. Beside her, Daniel's phone rang. He answered it with shaking hands, listened for 10 seconds, and went gray. They found her. She's in your office, the safe. They ran. Victoria kicked off her heels somewhere between the ballroom and the elevator, emerald dress hampering her stride until she gathered it in both fists and sprinted. Daniel kept pace, his terror a palpable force. Other guests turned to stare, but Victoria had no attention for anyone except the small girl who had somehow breached her supposedly impregnable security. The elevator took 47 seconds to reach the 73rd floor. Those seconds stretched into geological time. Victoria's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. A child could not actually open her safe, but the attempt itself raised questions she could not answer. How had Emma gotten past security? How had she known where to find the office? What else had the girl seen? The elevator doors opened onto chaos. 6 security personnel had already arrived, weapons drawn but lowered in confusion because their breach turned out to be a terrified child. Emma sat in Victoria's leather chair, small legs dangling, tear tracks on her face, looking at them all with an expression that mixed fear and curiosity in equal measure. "Hi," Emma's voice wavered but held. "I just wanted to see if what the lady said was true." Daniel pushed past security, dropping to his knees and pulling his daughter into his arms. "Emma, oh God, Emma, what did you do?" "I tried to open it." Emma pointed at the safe, still sealed, still secure. "I couldn't. I'm sorry, I just wanted to see." Victoria stared at her safe, then at the child, then at the father who looked like he might collapse from the collision of relief and horror. The safe remained closed. Nothing had been stolen, nothing breached. But Emma's presence in this office meant someone had failed. Somewhere in the supposedly airtight security protocols Victoria paid excessive amounts to maintain. Marcus Trenton arrived with several board members, his expression arranged into concern that felt performative. "Victoria, we need to call the police. This is trespassing, attempted theft. The child's father clearly planned this." "I didn't plan anything." Daniel's voice shook with the effort of maintaining control. "Emma acts on her own curiosity sometimes. I never told her to do this, never would. I don't even know how she got up here." "How convenient." Marcus gestured to security. "Call the police. Let them sort out whether this was childish mischief or calculated intrusion." Victoria held up one hand. Everyone stopped. In that moment, she made a decision based not on logic but on instinct, on the memory of being young and curious and making mistakes that carried consequences beyond understanding, on the unexpected recognition that this man's love for his daughter mirrored something she had once needed from her own father and never quite received. "No police." Marcus's face hardened. "Victoria, think about what you're doing. This sets a dangerous precedent." "My office, my decision." Victoria moved to her desk, pulled up the security logs with practiced efficiency. What she found made her pause, blood cooling. Someone accessed the security system 3 weeks ago, someone who knew how to edit footage, how to hide their presence. "Look at the timestamps." She turned the monitor so others could see. The digital record showed microscopic gaps in the footage, discontinuities that would escape casual review but betrayed expert tampering. Someone had been in her office before tonight. Someone had studied her safe, tested the systems, prepared the groundwork for something Emma had accidentally interrupted. The girl was not the first to attempt access. She was just the first to trigger the alarm. Victoria looked at Daniel, at his daughter, at the terror and confusion warring across both their faces. She thought about the cruelty she had witnessed downstairs, about walls built so high that nothing could scale them, about the cost of never trusting anyone. "You'll both come home with me, tonight." Daniel blinked. "What?" "If someone has been studying my security, they might think Emma knows something she doesn't. I won't risk your safety." Victoria's voice carried the authority she used to end arguments. This isn't a request. We can't just move into your house. You can and you will. Victoria turned to Marcus. Find out who accessed this office 3 weeks ago. I want names by morning. Marcus's expression suggested he wanted to argue, but he had worked for Victoria long enough to recognize when she would not be moved. He nodded once, lips pressed thin, and left with the security team. William Ashford arrived last, having been summoned from another floor where he had been conducting his own conversations. At 71, Victoria's father still commanded attention through sheer force of presence, white hair and granite face, eyes that calculated the cost of everything and found most things wanting. He looked at Emma, at Daniel, at his daughter, and his expression revealed nothing. Victoria, a word. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Daniel to comfort his daughter. William's voice dropped to the register he used for disappointing verdicts. You're making a mistake. Getting emotionally involved never ends well. I'm protecting a potential witness and managing a security breach. Victoria kept her tone flat, professional, giving him nothing to grab onto. This is damage control. This is sentiment masquerading as strategy. William studied her face with the attention he usually reserved for financial reports. You're letting that man and his daughter matter to you. I taught you better. You taught me to trust no one. Victoria met his gaze without flinching. Maybe that lesson did more harm than good. Something flickered across William's face, too fast to identify. He nodded once, turned, and walked away without another word. Victoria watched him go, feeling the weight of his disappointment and realizing with surprise that felt like vertigo that she no longer cared quite as much as she once had. She returned to her office. Emma had composed herself, though her eyes remained red, and her grip on her father's hand spoke of lingering fear. Daniel looked at Victoria with an expression mixing gratitude and discomfort, a man who understood he had no power in this situation, but could not help resenting that reality. Let's go. Victoria collected her phone and abandoned heels. We'll sort everything else out tomorrow. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of Ashford Tower, accessible only by private elevator that required both keycard and biometric scan. Daniel and Emma stepped into space that seemed designed to intimidate through its casual display of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan's glittering sprawl. Furniture that belonged in museums rather than homes created conversation areas no one conversed in. Everything was beautiful and nothing was welcoming. Emma's whisper carried awe she tried to hide. Dad, this place is like a movie. Daniel's discomfort was palpable. He stood in the entryway as if afraid his presence might damage something, shoulders tight with the particular tension of someone acutely aware of not belonging. Victoria recognized that posture, had seen it in her mother before cancer took her, back when Catherine Ashford had first married into wealth and learned to navigate a world that measured value in zeros following numbers. Guest rooms are upstairs. Victoria gestured to the floating staircase that looked like it defied physics. Make yourselves comfortable. There's food in the kitchen, though I can't promise it's anything a normal person would want to eat. Emma dragged her backpack toward the stairs, exhaustion finally overwhelming curiosity. Daniel started to follow, then paused. Thank you for not calling the police, for believing this wasn't some scheme. I don't know what I believe yet. Victoria's honesty surprised them both. But I know your daughter isn't a criminal, and I know someone has been targeting my security. Until I understand the connection, you're safer here. Daniel nodded, held her gaze for a moment that stretched longer than comfortable, then followed his daughter upstairs. Victoria stood in her empty living room, surrounded by furniture worth more than most people earned in years, and felt the silence press against her ears like water pressure. She poured whiskey from a crystal decanter. Neat, the way her father drank it. The burn down her throat provided focus. Someone had tried to breach her safe. Someone with the sophistication to edit security footage, to understand her building systems, to operate with the patience of an expert. That person was still out there, still planning, still waiting. And Victoria had just brought potential targets into her home. The logic that had guided that decision refused to crystallize into something she could explain to a board or justify in a report. She had acted on instinct, on the memory of a small girl offering her father half a sandwich, On the way, Daniel's eyes had remained warm despite systematic humiliation. On the dangerous, foolish, utterly human hope that maybe her father's lessons about trust had been wrong all along. Victoria finished her whiskey, set down the glass, and climbed stairs to check on her unexpected guests. She found Emma already asleep in the guest room, small body curled under blankets that cost more than Daniel probably made in a month. The girl's face in sleep looked younger than 8, vulnerable in ways her waking expression had hidden. Daniel sat in the chair beside his daughter's bed, keeping watch. He looked up when Victoria appeared in the doorway, and something in his face made her breath catch. No calculation, no angle, just a father protecting his child, bone-deep tired, but unwilling to rest until he knew she was safe. "She'll be okay." Victoria kept her voice low. "The guest room is secure. My whole building is secure." "Your whole building just got breached by an 8-year-old. "Fair point." The corners of Daniel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I really am sorry. Emma's curious. She doesn't always think through consequences." "She's 8. That's the job description." Victoria leaned against the doorframe. "How did you end up here, in my building, serving drinks at parties?" Daniel's face closed slightly, old pain shadowing his features. "My wife died 3 years ago. Car accident, drunk driver. One of those stories you hear all the time until it's your story. Emma was 5. I was working security installation. Good money, but 60-hour weeks. After Sarah died, I couldn't do it anymore. Emma needed me home, needed consistency, so I quit, found flexible work. Catering, event service. I can pick my hours, be home for breakfast and bedtime. You gave up your career for her. I gave up a job for my daughter." Daniel's correction was gentle but firm. "Career is what you do. Family is who you are. I'd give up anything for Emma." Victoria thought about her own father, about the lessons William had prioritized and the ones he had never learned. The distance between what Daniel described and what she had experienced was vast enough to swallow planets. "What kind of security work?" "System design mostly. I specialized in high-end installations for corporations, banks, private estates, encryption protocols, biometric integration, the kind of work where one mistake costs millions." Daniel's voice carried residual pride despite the past tense. "I was good at it. Why didn't you go back after Emma got older?" "Because the industry has a long memory and I burned the wrong bridges." The bitterness in his tone was new. "Sometimes doing the right thing ruins your future." Victoria wanted to ask more, but fatigue crashed over her like a wave. Tomorrow would bring questions, investigations, the careful dismantling of whatever plot was unfolding in her company. Tonight she just needed sleep and the temporary escape it offered from making decisions that mattered. "Your room is next door. If you need anything, the kitchen's fully stocked. Help yourself." She turned to leave, then paused. "Daniel, thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly who you seem to be. It's rarer than you'd think." Victoria retreated to her own bedroom, stripped off the dress that had cost $8,000 and suddenly felt like costume rather than clothing. She stood under a shower hot enough to hurt, washing away makeup and perfume and the residue of playing a role she was increasingly unsure she wanted to keep performing. The bed was enormous and empty. She lay in darkness, listening to the building's mechanical hum, the white noise of climate control and elevator motors and water in pipes. Through the walls, she could hear nothing from the guest rooms. But knowing they were occupied, knowing she was not alone in this fortress of steel and glass, made the silence feel less oppressive. Victoria's last thought before sleep was of Emma's face as the girl studied her at the party, that intensity of focus that suggested wheels turning behind young eyes. The child had not been planning theft. She had been solving a puzzle. The question was whether that puzzle connected to the larger picture Victoria could sense forming, but not yet see. Whether Emma's innocent curiosity had stumbled into something more dangerous than a precocious 8-year-old could imagine. And whether trusting Daniel Cross was wisdom or weakness or protection or the first crack in walls that had kept Victoria safe for a decade. She fell asleep without answers, and the questions followed her into dreams that felt more like warnings. Morning arrived with the particular brutality of winter sunlight on glass, sharp enough to hurt. Victoria woke to the smell of coffee and something else, something she could not immediately identify until recognition settled. Food. Real food being cooked, not delivered in containers or prepared by staff who disappeared before she woke. She found Daniel in her kitchen, navigating appliances that cost more than reasonable while producing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had learned to work fast during narrow windows of time. Eggs scrambled in a pan that had never been used. Toast browning in a toaster, still wearing its original sticker. Emma sat at the counter watching her father work, backpack open beside her, that notebook visible again with its margins full of sketches and numbers. Daniel glanced up, registered Victoria's presence. "I hope you don't mind. Emma needed breakfast, and I needed to keep my hands busy. I can't remember the last time anyone cooked in here." Victoria poured coffee from a pot Daniel had figured out how to operate despite its unnecessarily complex interface. "Probably never, actually." Emma looked up from her notebook with that assessing gaze Victoria was beginning to recognize. "You live alone in this big place?" "Emma," Daniel's tone carried gentle warning. "It's fine." Victoria sat across from the girl. "Yes, I live alone. I work a lot. Easier that way." "That's sad." Emma's honesty had no malice in it, just observation. "Dad works a lot too, but we still eat dinner together every night, even if it's just sandwiches." Daniel slid plates across the counter, meals assembled with care despite their simplicity. Victoria looked at the scrambled eggs and toast and felt something shift in her chest, some recognition of what was missing from spaces that held everything expensive and nothing essential. They ate in silence that felt companionable rather than awkward. Through the windows, Manhattan spread below them, millions of people beginning their days in apartments and offices and subway cars, none of them aware that 73 floors above the city, someone had tried to breach the executive safe of a multi-billion-dollar corporation and failed only because an 8-year-old had accidentally interrupted. Victoria's phone shattered the quiet. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. She answered on speaker. "Tell me you found something." Marcus's voice carried satisfaction that immediately raised Victoria's internal alerts. "We found the access point. 3 weeks ago, someone used Janet Reed's credentials to enter your office after hours. They knew the cleaning schedule, when cameras cycled for system updates, exactly which 30-minute window gave them time. Janet, Victoria's assistant for 7 years, the person who managed her calendar and knew her routines better than Victoria knew them herself. The betrayal landed like a physical blow, even as Victoria's analytical mind immediately questioned the conclusion. Janet wouldn't do this. The logs don't lie. Her keycard, her biometric scan, both registered at 2:15 in the morning on November 23rd. Daniel had stopped eating, attention fixed on the phone. Emma pretended to focus on her notebook, but Victoria could see the girl tracking every word. "I want to review the footage myself." "Of course. I'll have security send everything to your personal server." Marcus paused, and Victoria heard something else in that silence. "Victoria, we need to discuss the optics. You brought Daniel Carlson and his daughter into your home. The board is asking questions." "Let them ask." "Some members are concerned you're making decisions based on emotion rather than protocol." After what happened with, Marcus caught himself, but the implication hung there anyway. After Ryan. After the last time Victoria let someone close and paid for it. "I'm protecting potential witnesses while investigating a security breach." Victoria kept her voice level through sheer force of will. If the board wants to second-guess that, they can schedule a meeting. She ended the call before Marcus could respond. Daniel watched her with concern that felt intrusive because it seemed genuine. So, "Who's Janet?" "My assistant, the person I trusted to handle confidential information, coordinate with department heads, manage everything that keeps this company functional." Victoria stood, suddenly unable to sit still. "She's been with me since I became CEO. I promoted her twice, gave her bonuses that outpaced inflation, included her in discussions most assistants never hear." Maybe someone stole her credentials. Maybe. Victoria wanted to believe that. Or maybe I'm exactly as bad at reading people as my father always said. When the penthouse felt too small suddenly, too exposed with its glass walls showing a city full of people who might be enemies. Victoria retreated to her home office, pulled up the security footage Marcus had sent, and began the tedious work of reviewing 3 weeks of digital record. Daniel appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee. He set it beside her keyboard without comment, just a simple gesture of care. that Victoria did not know how to process. She nodded thanks and returned to the footage. The recording showed Janet entering Victoria's office at 2:17 a.m. on November 23rd, but something about the movement felt wrong. Victoria replayed it 3 times before identifying the problem. Janet walked with her right hand slightly extended, fingers spread, as if balancing. But Victoria had seen Janet walk thousands of times. The woman favored her left side, an old injury from a college volleyball accident that left her with a barely perceptible limp. This person moved wrong. Victoria isolated the frames, enhanced the image until pixelation blurred features. The height matched. The build matched. The clothing looked like Janet's preferred style. But the gait was wrong, and once Victoria saw that, other details emerged. The way this person held their shoulders, how they interacted with the door handle, pushing rather than pulling the way Janet always did. Someone wearing Janet's credentials but not Janet herself. Daniel leaned over her shoulder close enough that Victoria caught his scent, something clean and simple that matched the breakfast he had made. You see it too. The walk is wrong. More than that, look at how they approach the safe. Daniel pointed at the screen. They know exactly where it is, move straight to it without checking the room. But if you've never been in an office before, you'd orient yourself first, look around. This person has been here before or studied layouts extensively. Victoria replayed the sequence. Daniel was right. The intruder moved with the confidence of familiarity, someone who had prepared meticulously for this exact moment. What happened after they reached the safe? The footage cuts, 11 minutes of gap, then it resumes with the office empty. Victoria pulled up the system logs again, looking for the anomalies she had missed before. They knew how to edit the security system. That requires specialized knowledge. Or they had help from someone who does. Daniel straightened, and Victoria saw his expression shift into something professional. The demeanor of someone who had spent years thinking about exactly these kinds of vulnerabilities. Your IT department would have that capability. So would your security chief. Possibly facilities management if they handle digital infrastructure. Victoria made a list. Robert Kim, head of IT. Janet, despite the evidence suggesting she was framed. Marcus himself, though she immediately dismissed that because the CFO had been the one to bring the breach to her attention. William, because her father still maintained access to everything despite his semi-retirement. The list felt too short and too long simultaneously. Emma appeared beside them, having navigated to the office with the stealth children, perfected through years of finding adults during supposedly private moments. She studied the frozen image on Victoria's monitor with that unnerving focus. Can I see the part before they enter? Victoria exchanged glances with Daniel, who shrugged permission. She reversed the footage, played it from 2 minutes before the office entry. Emma watched once, then again. On the third viewing, she pointed. There, the reflection in the window. Victoria leaned closer. Emma was right. For just a moment, as the intruder passed the glass wall of an adjacent office, their reflection appeared. The angle was wrong for facial recognition, but it captured something else. The person carried a bag, small and black, slung across their chest. Can you zoom in on that? Victoria enhanced the image until the bag's outline sharpened. A logo appeared partially visible. She cleaned up the resolution, adjusted contrast, and there it was. Secure Tech Solutions. Daniel's face went carefully neutral. Victoria turned to him. What? That's the company I used to work for. Before I quit. The connection snapped into place with the particular clarity of puzzle pieces finding their intended positions. Someone with Daniel's former employer had accessed Victoria's office, using stolen credentials, carrying equipment from a security company, with knowledge of exactly how to bypass systems Daniel himself had likely designed. Did you tell anyone about Emma, about what happened at the party? No one except my daughter. Daniel's jaw tightened. But I worked with a lot of people at SecureTech. Some of them would remember my skill set, know what I specialized in. Victoria's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a name she had not expected. Ethan Cole. She answered with suspicion. How did you get this number? Ethan's voice carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to acquiring information others tried to protect. I make it my business to have numbers that matter. We need to talk, Victoria, about your security breach and about Daniel Cross. How do you know about either of those things? Because I've been tracking something for 6 months that just intersected with your problem. Can I come up? Victoria looked at Daniel, who nodded slowly. You know him? We work together at SecureTech. He's the best digital security analyst I ever met, which means he's also capable of exactly the kind of intrusion you're investigating. Comforting. But if Ethan says he wants to help, he means it. The man doesn't lie, which is why he's unemployable by anyone who values plausible deniability. 10 minutes later, Ethan Cole sat in Victoria's living room looking like someone who had forgotten that professional attire existed. Jeans worn thin at the knees, a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, sneakers that belonged in a dumpster. But his eyes held the particular alertness of someone whose mind never stopped processing information, calculating possibilities, seeing patterns others missed. He pulled out a tablet, called up files that made Victoria's security clearance look quaint. Marcus Trenton has been embezzling from Ashford Industries for 5 years. Small amounts, carefully laundered through shell corporations. He's good, I'll give him that. But he made a mistake 6 months ago, moved too much, too fast, and left traces in the blockchain ledger. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her. You're accusing my CFO of theft. I'm not accusing, I'm telling you. I have transaction records, corporate registrations, communication logs showing Marcus coordinating with offshore accounts. Ethan swiped through documents that represented hundreds of hours of forensic accounting. He's stolen $18 million. Daniel leaned forward. Why would he risk accessing Victoria's safe? If he already has that much money stashed, why expose himself? Because the safe doesn't just hold financial records. Victoria stood, pacing to the windows and back. It has the master files for every major transaction, every merger, every deal this company has made in 10 years. With that information, Marcus could manipulate stock prices, sabotage negotiations, or sell data to competitors for amounts that make 18 million look modest. Emma, who had been sitting quietly with her notebook, spoke up. Or he's protecting himself. If there's evidence of what he did, he needs to destroy it before you find it. 3 adults turned to stare at an 8-year-old who had just summarized complex criminal motivation with uncomfortable accuracy. Ethan grinned. I like her. She gets it. Emma, why don't you work on your homework upstairs? Daniel's tone allowed no argument. Emma gathered her things with visible reluctance but obeyed, pausing at the stairs. You should check who else has been acting weird lately. Bad guys usually don't work alone. She disappeared before anyone could respond to wisdom that felt disproportionate to her years. Victoria returned her attention to Ethan. Why are you helping me? What's your stake in this? Different client, different case, but Marcus showed up in my investigation like a virus in clean code. Ethan's expression hardened. He hired people to intimidate a whistleblower I was protecting. That whistleblower is now in witness protection because Marcus decided his secrets were worth more than someone's safety. So yes, I have a stake. I want him in prison and where he belongs. The pieces were assembling, but gaps remain, spaces where information should connect, but did not quite reach. Victoria studied the documents Ethan had brought, seeing her company's finances reduced to evidence of betrayal. Marcus had sat in board meetings, offered advice on mergers, helped her navigate hostile takeovers, all while systematically stealing from the corporation he pretended to serve. We need proof that will stand up in court. We need access to his personal computer. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. The encrypted files he thinks are secure. That's where the real evidence lives. Daniel shook his head immediately. That's illegal search. Anything you find would be inadmissible. Only if we're planning to go through official channels. Ethan's smile held no warmth. But there are other ways to make information public. Ways that don't require warrants or lawyers. Victoria considered the ethics, the risks, the potential consequences of taking justice into her own hands. Her father had taught her to operate within the law because legal protection mattered more than individual outcomes. But her father had also built an empire on calculated ruthlessness disguised as business acumen. And Victoria was beginning to question which of his lessons actually served her interest. If we do this, we do it right. No mistakes, no exposure, nothing that comes back on anyone except Marcus. Victoria looked at both men. Can you get into his system? With Daniel's help, yes. Ethan turned to his former colleague. You designed the security protocols SecureTech installed here. You know the back doors, the vulnerabilities, the ways around everything. Daniel's face showed conflict, loyalty to old principles, warring with new necessity. I haven't done that kind of work in 3 years. It's like riding a bike, except the bike is a felony and the road is someone's personal files. Ethan waited. I need you, Daniel. Victoria needs you. The appeal landed. Daniel looked at Victoria and she saw him make the calculation, weighing his daughter's safety against abstract notions of proper procedure. Protection 1. We do this once. We get what we need, we get out, and we never speak of it again. They spent the afternoon planning. Ethan had Marcus's schedule, knew the CFO worked late on Wednesdays, usually leaving the office around 9 p.m. That gave them a window between 9:15 and the building's 11 p.m. security sweep. 2 hours to bypass digital locks, access a password-protected computer, copy encrypted files, and disappear without leaving traces in any logs. Emma came downstairs around 3, found the adults hunched over laptops and architectural diagrams. She assessed the scene with a glance. You're planning something illegal. Daniel started to deny it, but Emma cut him off. I'm 8, not stupid. You're going to break into someone's office. Emma, I think you should. Emma sat beside her father with the confidence of someone stating obvious truth. If someone's stealing, you have to stop them, even if you have to break rules to do it. Victoria found herself smiling despite the situation. Your daughter has an interesting moral compass. Her mother and I taught her that rules exist to protect people, not to protect people who hurt others. Daniel's voice carried old grief mixed with pride. Sometimes the system fails. When it does, good people have to decide what matters more, following procedure or doing what's right. The words resonated in ways Victoria did not expect. She had spent a decade following her father's rules, building walls and maintaining distance and trusting systems over people. But systems were built by humans, which meant they inherited human failures. Marcus had exploited those failures for years, while Victoria assumed the structures around her held integrity they did not actually possess. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel found Victoria in her office reviewing the plan for the 100th time. He knocked softly on the open door. You should get some rest. I'll rest when this is over. Daniel entered, sat in the chair across from her desk. You don't have to do this. You could go to the authorities, let them handle it through proper channels, and watch Marcus destroy evidence while lawyers argue about warrants. Victoria shook her head. He's had years to perfect his escape routes. The moment he knows we're investigating, everything disappears. It's still a risk. If we're caught, you could lose everything. I could lose everything if we do nothing. Victoria met his gaze, held it. Why are you really here, Daniel? You could have refused to help. Could have taken Emma and left, gotten as far from this mess as possible. Daniel was quiet for several breaths. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she had not heard before. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by people you trusted. I know what it feels like when systems you believed in fail you. And I know that sometimes the only way to fix things is to break them first. He told her then the full story he had only outlined before. 6 years ago, Daniel had discovered vulnerabilities in a security system his company was selling to banks. The flaws were significant enough to allow sophisticated hackers access to customer accounts. Daniel had reported it to his supervisor, expecting the company to delay sales until the problems were fixed. Instead, management had covered it up. They edited Daniel's reports, reassigned him to different projects, and proceeded to sell the compromised system to 3 major financial institutions. When Daniel threatened to go public, they offered him a choice: sign a non-disclosure agreement and resign quietly with a severance package, or refuse and face legal action that would destroy his career and finances. Daniel had chosen to leave. He signed the NDA because he had a 5-year-old daughter to protect and a dying wife whose medical bills already threatened bankruptcy. But the choice had haunted him. The knowledge that he had prioritized his family's survival over strangers' financial security. 2 years later, one of those banks got hacked. Customers lost millions. Daniel's face showed the weight of that consequence. The vulnerability was exactly what I had reported. If I had fought harder, refused to sign, found a way to make the information public. Maybe that hack never happens. Or maybe you end up bankrupt and in jail, and Emma grows up without a father. Victoria's response was immediate. You made the choice you had to make. Did I, or did I take the easy path and tell myself it was for Emma? Daniel looked at her with eyes that had asked themselves this question thousands of times. That's the thing about moral compromise. You can always find justification, but knowing you made the understandable choice doesn't make it the right one. Victoria thought about her own compromises, the ways she had bent principles to maintain security. She thought about Ryan, about how thoroughly she had locked herself away after that betrayal, and whether protecting herself had become another form of cowardice disguised as wisdom. The man I know doesn't make cowardly choices. Her voice came out softer than intended. You gave up your career to be there for your daughter. That's not taking the easy path. Maybe, or maybe I just traded one kind of guilt for another. Daniel stood, moved to the window, looked out at the city that held so many lives intersecting in patterns too complex to predict. When Sarah died, I realized something. Time is the only thing we can't replace. Money, careers, reputation, all of that can be rebuilt. But the hours I didn't spend with my daughter while she was young, those are gone forever. He turned back to face Victoria, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest tighten. You asked why I'm helping you. Because you defended me when you didn't have to. Because you protected Emma when it would have been easier to call the police. Because I think maybe you were tired of being afraid, the same way I got tired of being guilty. The truth of that landed like a punch. Victoria was tired, bone deep, exhausted from maintaining walls that kept everyone out and nothing good in. She was tired of measuring every interaction for signs of betrayal, of assuming the worst of people because once, 10 years ago, someone had confirmed her father's cynical worldview. But exhaustion did not equal courage, and recognizing her isolation did not automatically give her the tools to change it. I don't know how to do this differently. Neither do I. Daniel's small smile held understanding rather than judgment. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together. The moment stretched, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Then Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs, calling for her father with the comfortable confidence of a child who knew she would be answered. Daniel left to check on his daughter. Victoria remained in her office, staring at the city beyond her windows, and wondering when exactly the wall she had built for protection had become a prison instead. Wednesday arrived with the particular weight of decisions made and courses set in motion. Victoria went to the office as normal, attended meetings, reviewed reports, smiled at colleagues while her mind tracked the minutes until evening. Marcus attended the executive briefing, charming and efficient, showing no signs of the calculated theft he had orchestrated for years. Victoria watched him with new eyes and saw the performance clearly. The way he deflected questions and redirected attention, always positioning himself as indispensable while ensuring no one looked too closely at his specific contributions. At 7 p.m., Victoria left the building through the main entrance, making sure security logged her departure. Daniel and Ethan would enter through the service access at 9:30, using credentials Ethan had obtained through methods Victoria had explicitly chosen not to ask about. Emma stayed at the penthouse with building security stationed outside, under strict orders not to open the door for anyone except her father or Victoria. The girl had accepted this with surprising calm, as if she understood stakes beyond her years. Back at the penthouse, Victoria changed into dark clothing and tried not to think about all the ways this could fail. Her phone buzzed at 9:45. Ethan's message was brief. Inside. 20 minutes of silence. Victoria paced her living room, watching the clock, calculating how long each stage should take. Ethan bypassing elevator logs, 3 minutes. Daniel navigating to Marcus's office, 2 minutes. Accessing the computer, anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes, depending on password complexity. At 10:20, her phone rang. Daniel's voice was tight. We have a problem. Victoria's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Marcus just came back. He's in the building, heading this way. Panic surged, but Victoria forced it down through sheer force of will. Where are you? In his office. We're copying files, but need another 10 minutes. Hide, let him take whatever he came for and leave. There's nowhere to hide. The office is glass walls, minimal furniture. Daniel's breathing was audible, controlled but strained. We're going to have to talk our way out of this. The line went quiet. Victoria gripped her phone hard enough to hurt, imaginations supplying scenarios each worse than the last. Marcus would call security. Daniel and Ethan would be arrested. The entire investigation would collapse. And worse, her involvement would be exposed. The board would vote her out. Her father would be proven right about trust being weakness. Her phone buzzed, Ethan this time. Complication escalated, Marcus armed. The words made Victoria's blood ice over. Armed meant Marcus had been prepared for interruption, which meant this was not coincidence but trap. He had known someone would come, had planned for it, and Victoria had walked Daniel straight into danger because she had been too focused on her own need for justice to consider that Marcus might be 3 steps ahead. She was moving before conscious thought completed, grabbing keys and heading for the private elevator. Emma appeared from her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What's wrong? Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone. Dad's in trouble. It was not a question. Emma saw too much, understood too much, and Victoria had no time to comfort her or lie. I'm going to get him. Stay here. Emma nodded, but her face showed fear Victoria had no tools to address. She ran. The private elevator dropped her to the executive floor in 45 seconds. Victoria emerged into hallway lighting that had shifted to night mode, motion sensors tracking her path. Marcus's office was 3 corridors away. She moved quickly but quietly, heels abandoned in favor of the flat shoes she kept in her office for days, when comfort mattered more than appearance. Voices drifted from Marcus's office, male and tense. Victoria approached the last corner before the glass walls would expose her presence, pressed herself flat, and listened. Marcus's voice carried satisfaction that made Victoria's skin crawl. I knew someone would come eventually. The question was whether Victoria would be smart enough to come herself or stupid enough to send proxies. Daniel responded with a calm Victoria did not feel. Put the gun down, Marcus. This doesn't have to escalate. Doesn't it? You're in my office, accessing my computer, stealing my property. Marcus laughed, the sound edged with something unstable. Though I suppose turnabout is fair play. I've been stealing from Victoria for years. Why? Ethan's voice came from somewhere to the left. You had a good position, excellent salary. Why risk everything? Because good was never enough. Because I spent 8 years watching Victoria inherit power she didn't earn, making decisions I could make better, being celebrated for work I did. The bitterness in Marcus's tone was raw, years of resentment finally unleashed. I built this company as much as she did. More, honestly, but I'm just the CFO. She's the CEO because her last name is Ashford. Victoria understood then. This was not just about money. It was about recognition, status, the corrosive resentment of someone who measured worth in titles and found himself wanting. Marcus had stolen not just because he needed funds, but because theft was rebellion against a hierarchy he could not otherwise challenge. So you plan to destroy her. Daniel's voice remained steady, and Victoria recognized the technique. Keep the subject talking. Buy time. Look for openings. Access the safe. Leak confidential information, crash the stock price. Something like that, though the plan adapted when your daughter interrupted. Marcus shifted position, footsteps audible against the floor. That was unexpected. An 8-year-old actually attempting to open the safe. It would have been amusing if it hadn't complicated everything. Victoria's hands curled into fists. Marcus had been prepared to hurt Emma, to eliminate anyone who threatened his scheme. The realization burned away the last vestiges of shock, replacing it with cold, focused rage. She pulled out her phone, texted security with the emergency code that would bring them running. Then she stepped around the corner into view. Marcus turned, gun swinging toward her with practiced ease. Victoria raised her hands, keeping movement minimal and non-threatening. I'm here. Let them go. Victoria, don't, Daniel started. Quiet. Marcus's attention fixed on Victoria with an intensity that felt predatory. The prodigal CEO finally making an appearance. I wondered if you'd have the courage. You want me, you have me. But Daniel and Ethan aren't part of this. Victoria kept her voice level despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. Let them leave. They're witnesses to a crime, Their crime technically breaking and entering. Marcus smiled, but the expression held no humanity. Though I suppose we're all criminals here now. You ordering illegal intrusion. Me stealing millions and threatening violence. It's almost poetic how far we've fallen from our professional standards. The sound of running footsteps echoed from distant corridors. Security responding to Victoria's alert. Marcus heard it too, his face shifting from satisfaction to calculation to something desperate. This ends badly for you regardless. Victoria took a small step forward. Surrender now, you might avoid attempted murder charges. Or I disappear and live comfortably on money I've already moved offshore. Marcus backed toward his desk, keeping the gun trained on Victoria. I have contingencies, documents scheduled to auto-release if I don't check in, information that will destroy Ashford Industries and your reputation with it. Then you've already lost. Victoria took another step. Because I don't care anymore about reputation. Not if protecting it means people like you get away with stealing from employees whose pensions you raided, whose families depend on this company's stability. Something in her tone made Marcus hesitate. Victoria saw the calculation in his eyes, the recalibration as he realized she meant what she said. The walls she had built to protect herself, walls Marcus had counted on keeping her trapped in predictable patterns, no longer held her the way they once had. Security burst through the door, weapons drawn, commands shouted. Marcus turned toward them, and in that instant of divided attention, Daniel moved. He crossed the space between them with the economy of someone who had trained for exactly these scenarios, grabbed Marcus's gun arm, twisted with precise force. The weapon discharged, sound enormous in the enclosed space, but the bullet went wide, embedding in ceiling tile rather than flesh. 3 seconds later, Marcus was on the ground, security personnel securing him with efficient brutality. The gun slid across the floor. Daniel stepped back, breathing hard, and looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed relief and residual fear. Ethan remained by the computer, fingers still moving across keys. Got it. Everything copied, encrypted, and uploaded to secure servers. Marcus can trigger whatever he wants. We have proof of every transaction. Victoria felt her knees weaken but refused to let them buckle. She had just watched a man she trusted try to destroy her, had narrowly avoided violence, had broken laws and compromised principles. But Emma was safe. Daniel was safe. And the evidence that would dismantle Marcus's schemes was secured beyond his ability to eliminate. The aftermath unfolded with bureaucratic inevitability. Police arrived, took statements, arrested Marcus on charges that would multiply as investigators dug deeper. Daniel and Ethan were questioned extensively about their presence in the office, but Victoria took responsibility, claimed she had ordered them there to retrieve files she suspected were compromised. It was close enough to truth to hold under scrutiny. By 3 a.m., Victoria, Daniel, and Ethan sat in her office while lawyers conferred in adjacent rooms and detectives cataloged evidence. Emma had been retrieved from the penthouse, brought down with security escort, and now slept on the couch in Victoria's office with her father's jacket as a blanket. Ethan reviewed the files they had obtained, building the case that would ensure Marcus faced consequences for all his crimes, not just tonight's armed confrontation. He's been embezzling for longer than I thought. 7 years, maybe 8. The shell corporations go back to before Victoria even became CEO. He was stealing from my father, too. Victoria felt exhausted beyond physical capacity. William hired Marcus, trusted him. That's going to destroy Dad. Good, Daniel's tone was flat. Maybe it'll teach him that trust is necessary, not weakness. Victoria looked at him, saw the anger in his face, the residual fear that came from facing down a gun, and something else. Something that looked like concern directed at her rather than himself. You could have been killed. So could you. Daniel met her gaze. You stepped into that office knowing he had a gun. What were you thinking? That I couldn't let you get hurt because of my problems. The honesty hung between them, implication clear. Daniel's expression softened. Your problems are dangerous. I have a daughter to think about. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. Daniel reached across the space separating them, took her hand in his, the contact warm and solid. We're in this together now, for better or worse. Victoria wanted to argue, to push him away for his own protection, to rebuild walls that suddenly felt less like safety and more like suffocation. But Emma slept 3 feet away, small and vulnerable and trusting her father to make good choices. And Daniel held Victoria's hand like an anchor, like someone who understood that strength sometimes meant leaning on others rather than standing alone. She did not pull away. For the first time in a decade, Victoria Ashford let herself be held by someone who asked nothing in return except the chance to share the burden. Dawn broke over Manhattan, turning glass towers gold. Marcus Trenton was processed into the system that would eventually send him to prison. Janet Reed was cleared when evidence proved her credentials had been cloned. Ethan Cole disappeared back into whatever shadows he emerged from, promising to send documentation once prosecutors were ready. Daniel drove Emma home in the pre-dawn quiet. Victoria watched them leave from her office window, father and daughter walking to a car that had seen better years, and felt something in her chest both contract and expand simultaneously. William Ashford appeared in her doorway as the sun cleared the horizon. He looked older than Victoria remembered, diminished by the weight of betrayal from someone he had personally recruited. "I was wrong about Marcus, about trust." Her father's voice carried a defeat Victoria had never heard before. "I taught you to suspect everyone. I made you hard because I thought hard meant safe." "It doesn't." Victoria turned from the window. "Hard means alone. Safe means having people who will come for you when you're in danger, even when it costs them everything." William nodded slowly. "Your mother tried to tell me that. Before she died, she said I was teaching you to survive, but not to live. I didn't understand the difference. I'm starting to." Her father crossed the office, did something he had not done since Victoria was a child. He hugged her. Awkward and brief, but real. "I'm proud of you, not because you built the company or caught a criminal, because you let yourself care about people who weren't me." He left before Victoria could respond, and she stood alone in her office watching the city wake up, thinking about Daniel's hand in hers and Emma's trust in the slow, terrifying process of learning to be vulnerable instead of invincible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Emma wants to know if you'll come to dinner tonight. She has questions about security systems, and apparently I'm not technical enough." Victoria smiled, genuine and unexpected. She typed back, "I'll bring dessert." She would face consequences for the decisions she had made. The board would have questions. Procedures had been violated. But Marcus was in custody, Emma was safe, and for the first time since Ryan's betrayal, Victoria could imagine trusting someone without waiting for the inevitable collapse. It was not forgiveness. It was not healing. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered more than Victoria had previously understood. 3 months passed like water through a sieve, measured not in calendar pages but in dinners shared and trust earned increment by increment. Victoria found herself leaving the office at 6 instead of 9, found herself caring more about Emma's science project than quarterly projections, found herself laughing at Daniel's terrible jokes with a lightness she had forgotten was possible. The board meeting in late March carried the weight of accumulated consequences. Victoria sat at the head of the table, 12 pairs of eyes assessing her with varying degrees of support or skepticism. Marcus's arrest had sent tremors through the company's foundation. Stock prices had dipped 7% before recovering. 3 major clients had requested reassurance meetings. The SEC had opened an investigation that would consume resources for the next 18 months. Eleanor Hayes, the board member who had defended Victoria during Marcus's attempted coup, spoke first. "The forensic audit is complete. Marcus Trenton embezzled $23 million over 7 years. The methodology was sophisticated enough that he would have continued indefinitely if not for your intervention. If not for pure luck." Robert Kim, head of IT, looked uncomfortable. "He exploited vulnerabilities in our system that should have been caught years ago. Vulnerabilities you're now addressing." Victoria kept her tone professional despite the exhaustion pressing against her temples. "We've implemented new protocols, brought in external auditors, restructured financial oversight. We're more secure now than we've been in a decade." William Ashford sat 3 seats to Victoria's right, position that once would have been directly beside her. He had requested the distance, claiming he needed to demonstrate that Victoria operated independently of paternal influence. But Victoria knew the real reason. Her father was learning to let go, painfully and imperfectly, but learning nonetheless. The question facing this board is not what happened, but whether leadership was adequate to prevent it. The speaker was Gerald Morrison, a board member who had aligned with Marcus more often than not. You brought a security breach into your personal residence. You ordered illegal intrusion into an executive's office. You involved a former employee with a questionable employment history. Daniel Cross's employment history is only questionable if you believe his former employer's manufactured narrative. Victoria's response was measured but firm. He left that company because they wanted him to cover up security flaws that could endanger customers. When he refused, they destroyed his reputation. That's not a questionable history. That's integrity at personal cost. Nevertheless, the optics are that I trusted my instincts and saved this company from a criminal who would have stolen millions more if allowed to continue. Victoria leaned forward, meeting Gerald's gaze directly. I made decisions that violated procedure. I won't apologize for them because those decisions were correct, even if the methods were unconventional. Eleanor smiled slightly. I moved to reaffirm Victoria Ashford as CEO with full confidence and expanded authority over security and financial oversight. The vote was 9-3, not unanimous but sufficient. Victoria felt the tension in her shoulders release fractionally. She had survived the board's judgment, maintained her position, earned the autonomy to rebuild what Marcus had corrupted. But the real test waited at home. Emma's school had called that afternoon. There had been an incident, details vague, a request that Victoria come for a meeting because Daniel was unreachable during his afternoon shift. Victoria had gone, entering the bright, primary-colored world of Riverside Elementary with no preparation for what she would find. Emma sat in the principal's office, looking small and defiant in equal measure. Her knuckles were scraped. Another girl, older and larger, sat across from her with a split lip and a mother radiating indignation. Principal Martinez, a tired woman in her 50s who had clearly navigated too many of these situations, gestured Victoria to a seat. Thank you for coming, Ms. Ashford. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. The other mother, who introduced herself as Patricia Brennan with the tone of someone whose name should matter, launched immediately into grievance. Your daughter attacked mine. Unprovoked, violent, completely unacceptable. Emma's not my daughter. Victoria's correction was automatic. I'm her father's partner. The words landed with implications Victoria had not fully considered before speaking them. Partner. When had that become true? When had she stopped at being the CEO harboring refugees and become part of their family unit? Principal Martinez redirected. Can you tell us what happened, Emma? Emma's voice was steady, but her eyes held something wounded. Melissa said my dad was a loser who serves rich people drinks. She said we live with Ms. Ashford because we're too poor for our own place. She said Mom died because she married a failure. Patricia Brennan's face reddened. Children say things. That doesn't justify violence. Melissa pushed Emma first. The voice came from the doorway. A boy, perhaps 10, with the gangly build of someone growing faster than coordination could manage. I saw it. Melissa shoved Emma and called her trash. Emma pushed back. Principal Martinez sighed. Is this true? Alma is true. Melissa? The girl's silence was answer enough. Patricia Brennan stood abruptly. I will not have my daughter accused by children who clearly have behavioral issues stemming from unstable home environments. Victoria felt anger kindle, clean and bright. She rose to match Patricia's posture, and the shift in her bearing made the other woman step back involuntarily. Emma's home environment is stable, loving, and none of your business. If your daughter initiated physical contact and made cruel comments about a deceased parent, then she's learning behavior that reflects poorly on her family, not Emma's. How dare you? I dare quite easily. Victoria's tone dropped to the register she used in boardrooms when establishing dominance. My name is Victoria Ashford. I own the building your family lives in, the bank that holds your mortgage, and the company where your husband works. I'm not threatening any of those things, but I want you to understand that you've badly misjudged who you're speaking to and what your daughter attacked. The principal intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. Both girls will serve detention. Both families will discuss appropriate conflict resolution. And I strongly suggest, Mrs. Brennan, that you teach your daughter that economic status is not an acceptable basis for cruelty. Patricia Brennan left with her daughter, indignation trailing behind them like perfume. Emma sat very still, processing what Victoria had said, what it implied. Victoria knelt beside Emma's chair, eye level with the girl whose scraped knuckles told the story of defending dignity against cruelty. You okay? I don't want to be trash. You're not trash. You're never trash. Victoria's voice carried fierce certainty. People who measure worth by money are revealing their own emptiness. You're brilliant and kind and brave. Your father gave up a career to raise you properly. That's not failure, that's love. Emma's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Melissa said Mom died because Dad couldn't afford good doctors. The cruelty of that struck Victoria like a physical blow. She pulled Emma into a hug, feeling the small body shake with suppressed sobs. Your mom died because a drunk driver made a choice that destroyed multiple lives. Money couldn't have changed that. Nothing could have changed that except the driver choosing not to drink. I miss her. I know. You get to miss her forever. Missing her doesn't mean you can't also love new people. Victoria pulled back to see Emma's face. You can love your mom and also let me care about you. Those things don't conflict. Do you care about me? Emma's question held vulnerability beyond her years, the fear of someone who had learned that people left. Yes, very much. Victoria had not planned to say it, but the truth demanded expression. You and your father have become important to me in ways I wasn't expecting. Ways that scare me because I haven't let people matter this much in a long time. Emma hugged her again, fierce and trusting, and Victoria felt something final click into place. She had been holding back, testing, waiting for inevitable betrayal. But Emma and Daniel kept not betraying her, kept showing up and being exactly who they seemed. And at some point, Victoria's vigilance had transformed into something closer to family than she had experienced since her mother died. Daniel appeared 20 minutes later, having gotten Victoria's message and left work immediately. He listened to the principal's summary with a face that moved through anger, pain, and protective fury. When Emma recounted what Melissa had said about Sarah, Daniel's jaw tightened to the point of pain. In the car afterward, Emma in the back seat and Daniel driving, silence pressed heavy. Victoria broke it. Emma defended herself and her family. I'm proud of her. She shouldn't have to defend those things. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. She's 8. She should be worried about homework and whether she'll make friends, not whether other kids think we're failures. She doesn't think you're a failure. But I am, Daniel's voice fractured. I work 3 part-time jobs to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots are normal. I'm 36 years old serving drinks at parties while my daughter gets mocked for being poor. Sarah deserved better than this. Emma deserves better than this. Victoria understood the spiral, recognized the pattern of self-recrimination that followed when systems prove cruel. You're the best father I've ever seen. Emma is loved, cared for, and growing into an extraordinary person because of you. That's not failure. It's not enough. The pain in those words resonated with Victoria's own fears, the suspicion that no amount of success in one area could compensate for failure in others. She thought about her relationship with William, the ways her father's wealth had purchased everything except the connection she actually needed. She thought about Marcus, who had confused achievement with worth and destroyed himself trying to close the gap. Enough is subjective. Victoria chose her words with care. You're enough for Emma. You're enough for me. If other people can't see that, the deficiency is theirs, not yours. Daniel pulled into the parking garage beneath Ashford Tower. They had been staying at Victoria's penthouse for 3 months now, an arrangement that had started as temporary protection and evolved into something neither of them had explicitly defined. Victoria's home had absorbed them, shifted to accommodate Emma's homework sprawl and Daniel's early morning routines, transformed from a showcase into a place where people actually lived. Emma went to her room to work on homework. Daniel stood at the windows looking out at Manhattan's evening sprawl, shoulders tight with the particular tension of someone fighting internal battles. Victoria approached, close enough to offer presence without imposing. Talk to me. I don't know how to do this. Daniel's voice was rough. I don't know how to be the person you need while also being the father Emma needs. I don't know how to date someone when I can barely afford to take her to dinner, when she owns the building and I'm living here because she lets me. You're not here because I let you. You're here because I want you here. Victoria touched his arm, felt the muscle tension beneath cotton. I don't need someone to buy me dinner or impress me with expensive gestures. I need someone real, someone who sees me rather than my net worth. Everyone sees your net worth first. You didn't. Victoria moved to stand beside him, both of them facing the city. At that party, you saw someone being cruel and you endured it with dignity. You saw your daughter trying to care for you. You didn't calculate what I could do for you. You just survived the moment and protected Emma. Daniel turned to face her fully. What are we doing, Victoria? This arrangement, this living situation? Us. What is it? The question hung between them, demanding clarity Victoria was not certain she possessed. 3 months of dinners and conversations and slowly eroding boundaries had not come with definitions. She had been content with ambiguity, with allowing the situation to exist without labels that might make it feel more vulnerable to loss. But Emma's question earlier, "Do you care about me?" had exposed the inadequacy of ambiguity. Caring without commitment was just another form of hedge, another wall disguised as something gentler. I don't know what to call it. Victoria's honesty felt dangerous. But I know I think about you when we're apart. I know I rearrange meetings so I can have dinner with you and Emma. I know when my father asked if we were together, I said yes before consciously deciding to answer. Are we together? I want to be. The words came easier than Victoria expected. I want whatever this is to be real instead of temporary. I want to figure out how to build something that doesn't require you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Daniel's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Victoria to parse. I love you. I've been trying not to, trying to maintain some kind of distance so it doesn't hurt when you realize I'm not worth the trouble, but I love you anyway. Victoria's breath caught. The declaration landed like something physical, something she could feel in her chest and stomach, in the backs of her knees. Love. She had not let herself think that word, had avoided the concept through careful mental discipline. But hearing Daniel say it, raw and scared and real, made all her avoidance feel like cowardice. I love you too. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff into air that might hold her or might not. I'm terrified of it. Terrified you'll turn out to be lying, or that I'll ruin this the way I ruin everything that matters. But I love you and I love Emma and I want to try building something permanent. Daniel kissed her, the first time their relationship had moved beyond chaste affection into something that acknowledged the full scope of what they meant to each other. The kiss was tentative and desperate in equal measure. Two people who had learned caution trying to remember how to be brave. When they separated, Emma was watching from the hallway with an expression of satisfaction that suggested she had been expecting this development for some time. Does this mean we're really staying? Victoria laughed, the sound surprising in its lightness. Yes, we're really staying. Good. Emma turned back to her room with the unconcerned confidence of a child whose world had just stabilized. I like it here, and you need us. The accuracy of that assessment should have stung, but instead felt like recognition. Victoria did need them, needed the way they made her apartment feel like home, needed the way Emma asked impossible questions, and Daniel cooked breakfast, needed the tether to something beyond quarterly profits and board approval. 6 months later, Victoria stood in her office reviewing the proposal Daniel had submitted through official channels. Director of Corporate Security, with full authority over system design, personnel hiring, and strategic planning. The salary was appropriate for the position, the benefits comprehensive, the terms identical to what any external candidate would receive. She approved it without hesitation and called Daniel to her office. He arrived with the careful formality of someone who understood that professional boundaries mattered even within personal relationships. Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. Your proposal is approved. You start Monday. Thank you. Daniel's relief was visible. I know this looks like nepotism. It looks like hiring the most qualified candidate for a position that requires someone I trust absolutely. Victoria pushed the signed documents across her desk. You'll earn this position through your work, not through our relationship. I expect excellence, not gratitude. You'll get both. The shift in their dynamic had been gradual but profound. Daniel had stopped accepting money for household expenses, insisting on contributing despite the absurdity of his income compared to Victoria's. He had enrolled Emma in a better school, one with students from varied backgrounds, where wealth was not the primary marker of worth. He had rebuilt his professional reputation through consulting work, taking on small security projects that reminded him what he was capable of beyond survival. Victoria had learned to share decision-making, to ask for input rather than dictating terms, to see Daniel's partnership as strength rather than weakness. They fought sometimes, usually about Daniel's tendency to defer to her judgment or Victoria's instinct to solve problems through money rather than effort. But they fought fair and apologized when wrong, and kept building something that felt less like a relationship and more like an architecture they were constructing together. Emma thrived. Her science project on biometric security had won first place in the regional competition. She had friends now, real ones who came over for sleepovers and thought it was cool that she lived in a penthouse but liked her for reasons beyond address. She still missed her mother, would always miss her mother, but the grief had softened from acute pain to chronic ache, manageable and honored. Victoria's relationship with William had evolved into something approaching mutual respect. Her father attended dinners occasionally, interacted with Emma with a gentleness Victoria had never seen directed at herself, and admitted privately that Daniel was the best thing that had happened to his daughter in years. The admission cost William something, acknowledging that his approach to protection had been isolation rather than support. But he said it anyway, and Victoria forgave him for past mistakes because she understood now that fear often masqueraded as wisdom. The proposal came on a Saturday morning in October, 1 year and 3 weeks after the Christmas party where everything had begun. Daniel woke Victoria early, asked her to dress warm, and drove them to a location he refused to identify. They ended up at Riverside Park as sunrise painted the Hudson in shades of amber and rose. Emma was already there. Having been smuggled out earlier through coordination Victoria only partly understood. The girl held a bundle of flowers, white roses that caught the early light. Daniel took Victoria's hand and led her to the waterfront. I need to ask you something, but I need to do it right, with Emma's permission and with Sarah's memory honored. He knelt on the cold concrete, pulled a small box from his pocket, and opened it to reveal a ring that was modest by Victoria's standards, but clearly represented significant sacrifice for Daniel. This ring belonged to my grandmother. She wore it for 60 years through good times and hard times and everything in between. When she gave it to me before she died, she said to give it to someone who understood that marriage wasn't about easy, but about choosing each other when things got hard. Emma stepped forward, holding the roses. We went to visit Mom's grave yesterday. Dad told her about you. He said you'd take care of us and make him happy, and that she would have liked you. Victoria's eyes burned. The inclusion of Sarah in this moment, the acknowledgement that loving someone new did not erase loving someone lost, cracked something open in her chest. Daniel's voice was steady, but his hand shook. Victoria Ashford, you've given me my career back and given Emma a home that's safe and shown us both what it means to be part of something larger than survival. I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, building with you, being the person who stands beside you when things get hard. Will you marry me? The answer was obvious, inevitable, terrifying and perfect in equal measure. Yes. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, stood, and kissed her while Emma cheered. The sunrise completed its transformation of the river into liquid gold. Somewhere in the city behind them, millions of people began their days unaware that in this small moment, 3 people had chosen to become a family in ways that transcended biology or history or any other marker of belonging. The wedding took place 3 months later in a chapel that seated 60. Not the cathedral William had suggested, not the destination Victoria's social circle expected, but a small stone building in Brooklyn where light filtered through stained glass in patterns that felt like blessing rather than judgment. Emma stood as junior bridesmaid, dressed the color of winter sky, holding Victoria's bouquet during the ceremony. Ethan served as Daniel's best man, having emerged from whatever shadows he inhabited long enough to witness his friend's transformation. Eleanor Hayes attended, along with select board members who had proven themselves more than corporate allies. William sat in the front row and wept openly, finally allowing himself to express emotion he had suppressed for decades. Victoria wore a simple dress, ivory rather than white, her mother's pearls at her throat. Daniel wore a suit he had purchased himself, refusing Victoria's offer to buy something more expensive because he wanted to stand at the altar in clothing he had earned. The vows were traditional but felt revolutionary when spoken by a CEO and the man she had once met serving drinks at a party. When Daniel promised to honor and cherish, his voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what those words required. When Victoria promised to love and support, she meant it with a certainty that transcended the fear that had defined her for so long. The reception was warm and small, held in a restaurant Daniel had chosen because the food was excellent and the atmosphere unpretentious. There were no ice sculptures or imported champagne, just good food, genuine laughter, and the sense of people gathering because they actually cared rather than because invitation demanded attendance. Emma gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry in turns. My dad always told me that family is who you choose, not just who you're related to. I chose Victoria the night she defended us when people were mean. I chose her when she let me stay in her house even though I tried to break her safe. And I choose her now as my new mom because she sees us and loves us, and that's what family means. Victoria could not speak for several minutes after Emma finished, overwhelmed by the trust and love in that young voice. She had been chosen, deliberately and consciously, by a child who could have resented her for replacing a mother who was irreplaceable. But Emma understood something Victoria was still learning, that love expanded rather than divided, that making space for new people did not diminish the memory of those lost. Daniel danced with Emma first, father and daughter moving in the unself-conscious way of people who knew each other completely. Then he danced with Victoria, and the world reduced to the space between heartbeats, the warmth of his hand on her back, the certainty that she had finally found something worth more than all the money her family had accumulated over generations. Near the end of the evening, William approached Victoria with an envelope. Open it later, when you have time to think. Inside was a letter handwritten in the careful script her father had perfected over decades of signing documents. Victoria read it in the car on the way to the hotel, Daniel driving and Emma asleep in the back seat. The letter was an apology, specific and comprehensive, for every way William had failed his daughter by teaching her to value security over connection. He detailed moments Victoria had forgotten, times when she had needed emotional support and received business advice instead, times when his fear of loss had translated into isolation rather than protection. He acknowledged that her mother would have been disappointed in how he raised their daughter, how he had turned grief into a weapon against vulnerability. The final paragraph made Victoria cry in ways the ceremony itself had not. You found something never could, the courage to let someone matter enough to hurt you. You chose love over safety, and in doing that, you became stronger than I ever was. I'm proud of you, not for running the company or surviving betrayal, but for being brave enough to try again after learning how much trying can cost. Sarah would have been proud too. You gave her daughter a mother who will teach her what I failed to teach you, that the best parts of life require risking the worst pain. Daniel glanced over at the sound of her tears. You okay? Yes, Victoria folded the letter carefully. Better than okay, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 1 year later, they stood on the penthouse terrace watching snow fall on Manhattan. Emma was 10 now, gangly and confident, doing homework at the dining table inside. Victoria was 8 months pregnant, uncomfortable, and radiant in equal measure. Daniel had just been promoted to Vice President of Security Operations, overseeing not just Ashford Industries, but consulting with other corporations on ethical system design. Emma came outside, wrapping a blanket around Victoria's shoulders, with the careful attention of someone who understood that care was more than gesture. The baby's going to be lucky. Why's that? Because she'll have a dad who chose love over career, a mom who learned to trust again, and a sister who knows that family is complicated, but worth fighting for. Emma grinned. Plus, we're all going to teach her how to break into safes responsibly. Victoria laughed, the sound free of the guardedness that had once characterized every interaction. Absolutely not. Maybe a little? Emma's eyes held mischief. Just for emergencies. Daniel joined them, completing their small circle. I was thinking about that night, the Christmas party. If someone had told me that getting mocked by rich people and having my daughter try to break into a CEO's safe would lead to this, I never would have believed them. If someone had told me that a joke about marriage would actually result in one, I would have called security. Victoria leaned against Daniel, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of a life she had not known how to want until it appeared. But here we are. Emma looked between them with satisfaction. You know what's funny? I never actually tried to open that safe. I was just looking at it, trying to understand how it worked. The alarm went off because I touched it wrong. Victoria and Daniel both turned to stare at her. You're telling me this now? After a year of thinking you attempted to break into my safe? I attempted to understand your safe. That's different. Emma's logic was unassailable in its childish certainty. Besides, if I hadn't touched it, none of this would have happened. So really, I saved everyone by being curious. The girl had a point. If Emma had not triggered that alarm, Victoria would never have brought them home. She would never have faced Marcus's betrayal directly. Never hired Daniel, never learned that the walls she built for protection had become prisons instead. She would still be alone in her penthouse, successful and safe, and fundamentally unconnected to anything that mattered. You saved us. Daniel pulled both Victoria and Emma closer. By being exactly who you are, curious and fearless and refusing to accept limitations. They stood together as snow fell heavier, blanketing the city in white that muffled sound and softened edges. Inside the penthouse, warmth and light beckoned. Dinner needed to be prepared. Homework needed to be finished. Life needed to be lived in the ordinary ways that added up to extraordinary when done with people who mattered. But for this moment, they remained on the terrace. 3 people about to become 4, watching Manhattan transform into something beautiful and temporary and worth treasuring precisely because it would not last forever. The snow would melt. The baby would grow. Emma would eventually leave for college. Daniel would age, and Victoria would age, and the only constant would be the choice they made each day to keep choosing each other. Victoria thought about the safe in her office, the one that had started everything. It remained secure, impenetrable to everyone except herself, but it no longer held anything she could not afford to lose. The truly valuable things, trust and love, and the knowledge that she could survive being vulnerable, existed outside any lock, kept safe not through isolation, but through the daily maintenance of connection. The real security system was this: 3 people standing together in the snow, soon to be 4, building a life that required no encryption because it was protected by the only thing that actually mattered in the end: each other. Emma broke the silence first, practical and present. I'm cold. Can we go inside? They went inside together, tracking snow across expensive floors that would clean. The penthouse absorbed them, welcomed them, held space for the noise and mess and love that had transformed it from showcase to home. Dinner preparations began with the organized chaos of people comfortable with each other's presence. Homework was completed amid conversation. Evening rituals unfolded with the comforting predictability of family routine. Later, after Emma was asleep and the city had quieted into its nighttime rhythm, Victoria and Daniel lay in bed talking about nothing important and everything essential. Names for the baby, where to vacation next summer, whether Emma's increased interest in computer programming was adorable or slightly concerning. Daniel's hand rested on Victoria's stomach, feeling the movements of a life they had created together. I never thought I'd get this again. After Sarah died, I assumed that chapter was closed. I never thought I'd get this at all. Victoria covered his hand with hers. I thought safety required solitude. That trust was weakness dressed up as virtue. What changed your mind? Victoria considered the question, tracing their story from that first humiliating moment at the Christmas party to this quiet intimacy. You did, you and Emma. You kept showing up and being real and not wanting anything except connection. Eventually, I had to accept that my father was wrong about trust. It's not weakness. It's the only thing that makes strength worth having. Daniel kissed her, slow and tender, and Victoria felt gratitude so intense it bordered on pain. Gratitude that Emma's curiosity had led her to that office, that Victoria had made an impulsive joke about marriage, that Marcus's betrayal had forced confrontation. that every seemingly random choice had led to this moment, this life, this profound sense of belonging to something larger than herself. I love you. The words came easily now, freed from the fear that had once made them impossible to speak. I love you too. Daniel's response held certainty that transcended romance into something foundational. We're going to be okay. All of us. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. Victoria believed him. For the first time since her mother died, since Ryan's betrayal, since she learned that the world was dangerous and trust was liability, Victoria believed that safety could exist alongside vulnerability, that walls could be lowered without inviting destruction, that the best defense against a cruel world was not isolation, but the deliberate construction of relationships strong enough to withstand pressure. She fell asleep in Daniel's arms, in the home they had built together, secure in ways that had nothing to do with locks or money or carefully maintained distance. Secure because she was known and loved anyway. Because Emma slept down the hall, safe and cared for. Because tomorrow would bring challenges they would face as partners, rather than individuals. The snow continued falling through the night, covering Manhattan in white that would melt by afternoon. Temporary and beautiful and worth experiencing, despite its impermanence. Like everything worth having, love required accepting that nothing lasted forever and choosing it anyway. Victoria woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee, Daniel already up and making breakfast with Emma's help. Their voices drifted through the penthouse, familiar and warm, the soundtrack of a life Victoria had not known how to want until it was offered. She lay still for a moment, savoring the sounds of family, then rose to join them. The morning unfolded in ordinary magic. Breakfast eaten together. News reviewed. Emma's excitement about a school project. Daniel's plans for work. Victoria's meeting schedule. The mundane details that constituted daily life, unremarkable, except that they happened with people who had chosen to build something permanent from the wreckage of what came before. At the office, Victoria moved through her day with focus that no longer required sacrificing everything else. She led meetings and made decisions and drove the company forward. But she also left at 6, rejected weekend work unless truly urgent, and prioritized dinner with her family over networking events that would have once seemed mandatory. The board noticed. Some approved of the balance, claiming it made her more effective by preventing burnout. Others worried that personal commitments would eventually compromise professional judgment. Victoria listened to both perspectives and continued making choices based on what mattered to her, rather than what others thought should matter. Emma's science fair approached, and Victoria found herself spending evenings helping with a project about encryption algorithms. The girl's understanding of complex systems remained both impressive and slightly unsettling. But Victoria had learned to nurture Emma's gifts rather than fear them. Curiosity had brought them together. Curiosity would carry Emma toward whatever future she chose to build. Do you ever regret it? Emma asked one evening while they worked on her display board. Marrying Dad instead of someone rich and important? Victoria looked at the girl who had inadvertently changed her entire life trajectory. Your father is important. Not because of money or status, but because of who he is, because he chose integrity over convenience, love over ambition, family over career advancement. Those choices made him the person worth marrying. But you could have had someone easier. Easier doesn't mean better. Victoria's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, feeling the baby shift position. Love isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be worth the effort. Your father is worth every moment of effort, every compromise, every challenge we face together. Emma nodded with the satisfaction of someone getting the answer they hoped for. Good, because I like having a mom again. The simple declaration hit Victoria with unexpected force. Mom. Not Victoria, not her father's wife, but Mom. The title carried weight beyond words, responsibility and trust, and the acceptance that she had earned a place in Emma's life, not through genetics, but through consistent presence. I like being your mom. Victoria's voice roughened with emotion. You make me better. You and your father both. You reminded me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. They continued working, two people separated by decades and connected by choice, building a science fair project that would probably place well, but mattered less than the time spent creating it together. The baby arrived in early spring, a girl they named Catherine Sarah Cross Ashford. Catherine for Victoria's mother, Sarah for Daniel's first wife, a deliberate bridge between past and present. The delivery was complicated enough to be frightening, but straightforward enough to end well. Victoria held her daughter for the first time and understood viscerally what Daniel had tried to explain about love, expanding rather than dividing. Emma was enchanted, taking her role as big sister with absolute seriousness. She helped with feedings and diaper changes and sang lullabies with a slightly off-key enthusiasm that made everyone smile. Daniel moved through new fatherhood with practiced confidence, the muscle memory of caring for Emma returning easily. William Ashford held his granddaughter and wept again. This private man who had spent decades hiding emotion finally allowing himself to feel things fully. She has your mother's eyes. She has Daniel's smile. Victoria watched her father cradle the baby with unexpected gentleness. She has Emma's curiosity. She's ours, Dad, all of ours. William nodded, understanding the point. Family was not genetics alone, but the deliberate intertwining of lives through choice and commitment in daily acts of care. He had learned that lesson late, but learned it nonetheless, and his relationship with Victoria had deepened into something approaching friendship as well as blood connection. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in the way new parenthood always was. Sleepless nights and constant vigilance, tiny fingers wrapped around larger ones, the particular smell of newborn that triggered protective instincts beyond reason. Victoria reduced her office hours, delegating more to trusted executives, discovering that the company functioned perfectly well without her constant oversight. Emma thrived in her big sister role, though she occasionally struggled with sharing parental attention. Daniel navigated the balance with care, ensuring Emma knew she remained essential and loved. Victoria learned patience she had not known she possessed, found reserves of tenderness that had no connection to business acumen or professional competence. On their first anniversary, Daniel gave Victoria a gift that made her laugh and cry simultaneously. The original security schematics for her office safe, signed by every technician who had worked on its installation. I thought you might want a reminder of where we started. We started with me being cruel and you being humiliated. We started with both of us surviving a difficult moment with our dignity mostly intact, Daniel corrected gently, and ended up here, which suggests that survival is sometimes the first step towards something better. Victoria framed the schematics, hung them in her office where she could see them during difficult days. A reminder that the most important things in life often began with chaos and uncertainty, that the best outcomes frequently emerge from situations that seemed impossible while happening. Emma's 10th birthday arrived with a party that included friends from school, cousins Victoria had never met before Daniel, and the kind of organized chaos that characterized childhood celebrations. The girl had requested a cake shaped like a computer server, which the bakery had struggled to execute, but ultimately delivered with reasonable accuracy. Standing in their living room watching Emma laugh with her friends, Victoria felt contentment that had nothing to do with achievement or acquisition. This was wealth beyond money. People gathered because they wanted to be, genuine affection instead of social obligation, the messy reality of lives intertwined. Daniel appeared beside her, Catherine asleep against his shoulder. You okay? More than okay. Victoria leaned into him, creating a small bubble of family within the larger party. I was just thinking about that night, the Christmas party. If I could go back and do it differently, don't. Daniel's interruption was firm but kind. Every choice led here. The good ones and the mistakes and the moments we wish had happened differently. All of it combined to create this exact moment. I wouldn't change a single thing. Victoria understood what he meant. Changing the past would risk changing the present, and the present was too precious to gamble with. They had earned this life through pain and perseverance, through risking vulnerability and choosing trust when caution would have been safer. The cost had been high, but the reward was immeasurable. As evening approached and guests departed, as they cleaned up the detritus of celebration and tucked an exhausted Emma into bed, as they settled into the quiet rhythms of night with their infant daughter, Victoria felt peace that transcended circumstance. She had built a life worth living, surrounded by people who knew her completely and loved her anyway. The safe in her office remained secure, impenetrable to everyone except herself, but it no longer defined her sense of security. That came from Daniel's hand in hers, from Emma's trust, from Catherine's dependent love. It came from choosing connection over isolation, from learning that strength sometimes meant accepting help, from understanding that the best protection against life's cruelty was building something worth protecting. Victoria Ashford Cross stood at her window, watching snow fall on Manhattan one more time, and thought about the impossible promise that had become reality. Marriage as a joke that transformed into commitment. Safety through isolation that evolved into security through connection. A child's curiosity that unlocked more than just a door. Sometimes the most valuable things could not be kept in safes because they lived in the space between heartbeats, in the choice to be vulnerable, in the radical act of opening yourself to another person and saying, "Here I am. I choose you. I choose this. I choose love." The snow fell heavier, covering their footprints almost as soon as they made them. But that was okay. They knew the way home.